Hi everyone and welcome to the KIMIYA Healing Podcast. I am going to do a slightly different podcast today. I'm going to share a conversation that I've had with my dear father tonight. And some of you may know my father works with people who are very challenged emotionally and who are actually in high security prisons and hospitals for extreme mental health conditions, and has worked with people who have been convicted of murder, serial murder, etc., and all sorts of really challenging life circumstances that I actually don't deal with clients who are at that end of the spectrum, so to speak. And my father was telling me the story of two young boys that he met in one of the prisons, and both of them had killed their fathers. And they were admitted, as soon as they were admitted to prison, they were drugged, heavily medicated, and when they would resist medication, they would be injected once every fortnight with some kind of substance to essentially numb them or calm them, soothe them, but essentially numb them. And of course it's a difficult, we can't imagine how difficult that is for anyone involved in that system of care to have to administer or receive that kind of approach. And it was really interesting to hear the other spectrum of mental health, forensic mental health, as he's involved in. So my dad was telling me this story, and he was saying, what do you do to help people that are in that kind of position? Like, how does your treatments, how can they be effective, or how can they, what's your contribution to this, which is a systemic challenge around the world, particularly in the Western world, where our method of dealing with crime and with dealing with extreme cases of mental health is medication and incarceration. And I didn't really think about my answer, but it came forth. And my answer was, I'm doing womb work. I'm offering womb work. This is the solution. And obviously that was like, my dad was like, what? Like, how on earth does that relate? And my answer was, these boys, these young men, they have been born from a woman. They have been born from a womb. They've been created in a womb with the identity, the trauma imprints, the consciousness, the DNA, the environmental factors of both parents, but particularly of the mother. And their identities have been formed and forged within a family. That's their first experience of a system or of the world is womb, and their first experience of, and their experience after that is of the family system. So my answer was, I'm supporting women to become more conscious and more aware of the trauma that they're holding in their bodies, the trauma that's been carried down, that they're carrying the burden of in their bodies and in their wombs for so many generations. And it's not where trauma begins, but it's a very deep place of transformation and creation. And the womb and the parenting, particularly the mothering and the nurturing that comes in the first few years of life, the connection, the bonding, and also the experience of the family system is so important when it comes to the identity and the traumas that these young boys and these young men are carrying that lead them into a life of crime, particularly a life of murderous crime, particularly murderous rage. And so I started to explain this and realised that this is so key, because it's really difficult to change something that has solidified without changing the entire system, because someone that has committed murder, serial murder, they are going to be physically manifest and have manifested their environments, they have manifested their parenting, they have manifested their belief systems that have been carried through all these generations. They have carried emotions in their bodies and in their baby bodies of what has been unresolved with their parents. So my answer, my contribution, and my solution to this type of systemic crisis and deep humanity calling for justice and for balance and for recognition is actually to work at a much earlier stage with womb work, by supporting conscious, aware embodiment of womb that leads to conscious conception, that leads to conscious parenting and birth and parenting, and that leads to a reconstellation of the family system. And I also support that through my work with families, where I will work with the whole family, all nervous systems at the same time. And I was explaining this to my dad. He kind of got it. And it's not a, I don't see it as a kind of a solution that comes far down the line. It's something that needs to be implemented and aware of much earlier on. So, yeah, it's really difficult and perhaps irrelevant to talk to a young, incarcerated, heavily medicated, high-risk man who's in for multiple murder, to talk to him about womb work, but to talk to him about his family and the parenting that he feels he received or didn't receive, and how he feels emotionally towards his parents, towards his family. For me, that's really relevant. But if we want to get to the root cause, and if we want to change the whole constellation and actually create a new system, because the system we've got at the moment that deals with mental health, that deals with extreme cases of mental health crisis, it's just one paradigm, and I really believe it needs to be supplemented and supported by a deeper understanding, and that is the trauma understanding and trauma awareness. So it's really, in my view, impossible to talk about mental health without talking about trauma. And it's amazing that there is so much emphasis on the brain and mental health and not on the heart and emotional welfare and well-being, and not on the ancestral and spiritual transmission and the energetic transmission of trauma that happens and that is happening in all families and in all lines on an ongoing basis. So for me, womb work and womb alchemy is not something that needs to necessarily be, for me, it is something that can happen at all stages. It's not just a spiritual experience. It's not just a spiritual rebirth. It can be, of course, but it has real practical applications, because a woman that is embodied, first of all, is feeling and is more authentic and more sincere, more in touch with her cycles, more in touch with her emotions, more self-reflective, more able to self-soothe, and all of these factors are going to affect her nervous system. All of these factors are going to affect the neurological development of her child in utero, which is where I do a lot of my work with women, is actually in utero. We have to go far back very often into those root causes and to understand how the fetus actually developed in an environment of perhaps hostility or fear, and there's all sorts of circumstances that women find themselves in when they are when they're pregnant or when they're giving birth, that are that can be really traumatic and take its toll on the nervous system of a child, and it can lead to structural distortions in the cranium. It can lead to structural distortions in the spine, which then, if left untreated, of course manifest into other types of physical challenges, physical problems, and all physical illness and disease in the body will have an emotional consequence and will take an emotional toll on that person. So treating mental health without talking about trauma, without deeply understanding that in utero trauma, birth trauma, early family trauma needs to be addressed and needs to be healed through the body at a somatic level at least, and then at an energetic level to go deeper into patterns and consciousness structures that have arisen. For me, that is the work of the womb alchemist. So it was a really interesting conversation to have and to share what I believe is my contribution to the system. And in some ways it does require a lot of re-education or education and awareness at some level, because it's perhaps something that women have become quite disconnected from, the need to be embodied and what their actual nervous system imprints can manifest in their unborn child. So by doing womb work, essentially you can allow yourself to recreate the conditions of your womb. You can recreate the birth experience of your child and that you've had, and womb work can be done at any point in time, and the in utero world, in utero development can be accessed at any age. But of course it's much easier in a way to access this at young. So when you're able to recognize, and often women that have gone through birth and particularly difficult birth processes are left with a really strong residual overhang, emotionally, psychologically. They're left with, physical patterns in their body, whether it's scar tissue, whether it's pelvic imbalance, pelvic floor issues, etc. There are consequences that can be met at a very deep level and that can be healed, and it can support an emergence of a new consciousness, and it can support, therefore, an emergence of a new paradigm of parenting, a conscious paradigm of parenting. So womb work is applicable at all ages, and for all people. And increasingly I'm getting men who are contacting me saying they're really interested in how womb work can support them, because they're aware of the trauma that they have absorbed when they were in utero from their mothers, also from their fathers, and they're wondering what they can do about it. And often they've led a life that has had to feature discomfort, and sometimes more than discomfort, sometimes it's been dysfunction, and that can be physical, emotional, psychological dysfunction. And increasingly men are asking, how can womb work actually support me and benefit me? What do I need to do? So I've actually written a few blog posts on masculine womb trauma and how some of the clients I've worked with who have been born to women who have been perhaps really going through a challenging time emotionally, or who were very disconnected from their feminine embodiment, who were emotionally unsupported when they were pregnant, who didn't have the resources around them or the support systems around them to be able to feel safe in their bodies during pregnancy, or to feel safe in their birthing process, or where there was a lot of fear in the birth process and a lot of panic. It can really be supportive to do womb work with a womb alchemist, and go deeper than the cognitive level, because sometimes these imprints in the nervous system are held at a pre-cognitive level. And if you're interested in this, you can read my blog article about fetal neurological development, and where I ask the question and pose evidence for fetal consciousness pre-neurological development. So by the time somebody is in their 20s, 30s, and has become a murderer, for example, they have gone through not just the crime and the challenging environments and situations, relationships they found themselves in that have led to that activity, that have led to that identity, but they've gone through a whole entrance into a world, into a womb that has signaled to them a certain frequency, a certain energy, a certain message. And if that message was filled with fear and trauma and pain and rage, and was left them feeling disconnected and alone and confused and unable to articulate why, it can lead to attempts to self-soothe in ways that are perhaps really quite painful and destructive. But if you don't know what you're doing is painful, because all you've ever known is pain, you're kind of caught in this cycle. So it was really interesting to have the conversation and to approach masculine trauma from two completely kind of separate ends of the scale. So I would say I work with women to support them to embody their feminine conscious creation, and to do that through their bodies and through womb, by resolving their trauma and their past and their imprints, and to allow them to be more conscious in their birthing, conscious in their parenting style and skills, and to really become aware of what they are sharing and what they are transferring, even when it comes to things like breastfeeding. Like, I've worked with clients who I've had to support them to clear the imprints of being breastfed, where the mother was in a state of constant stress and panic due to her environment. So every time milk was being expressed and the child was breastfeeding, the child's nervous system was actually unease, and it was in a state of unease and fear. And so it started to associate from a very young age, feeding with stress and feeding with fear. And later on in life, that person developed a whole load of really difficult emotional circumstances and eating disorders, and could never, with any therapist they work with, could really never get to the bottom of why they keep going round in these cycles of unable to break the eating disorder and relational challenges that they were having. And that's because the root cause is something that they were never able to articulate to a therapist. Because if you are not aware that that's what was happening when you were being breastfed as a child, for example, how would you know to even bring that into a therapy session? You wouldn't. And the work I do is inherently about making unconscious imprints conscious, by bringing the dark into the light. That's what the work of healing is. That's what the work of self-illumination and alchemy really is. It's about that constant opportunity and process of transmuting darkness, i.e. Self-ignorance, the veil that lies over life experiences, and bringing it into the light. So that client went on to resolve their eating disorders and actually heal at a very deep level their relationship with their mother, which was always strained and they never really knew why. And they went on to develop a much deeper compassion for their mother's strife and struggle, and really being able to empathize with her, because they could feel during the therapy sessions, they could really feel and understand through their felt sense why their mother was feeling the way she was, what was going on in the background environment that was making her scared and panicked and fearful and stressed. And the fact that even though they wanted to be nurtured and held and fed by their mother in a way that was peaceful, it wasn't forthcoming and it wasn't easy. But that client was able to take the blame away from where they had previously placed it. They'd placed it in a consciousness paradigm that involved the mother figure being the center of the issue, being the center of the problem, and therefore her mother got all of the projections from her, as in she blamed her mother for everything, but never really understood what life was like for her mother. And this is an understanding that comes, as I said, it's not just a cognitive understanding of, oh, okay, I get it, my mum went for a really hard time, I can accept that. It's not that kind of awareness. It's something much, much deeper. It's compassion that comes from the body, because when you feel at a very deep level the experience, the true nature of, in that case, the client was really also tuning into the sacrifice that their mum made to breastfeed, even though it was difficult for her, which was the flip side of the experience that she had historically been aware of. She started to really recognize that, wow, okay, my mum has actually sacrificed so much for me. In fact, her own sense of self has been sacrificed because she really just wanted to do what was right. And even though it was difficult and it led to challenges, that there is a strength there is a real strength that I can respect. And as a result, she became closer to her mum, and she became more able to, as I said, forgive and move through that relationship, connect at a deeper level with her mum. It also allowed her to connect at a deeper level with her daughter. So she, in her work through this journey that she took with me, was able to harmonize her feminine line, not just for herself, but also for her daughter. And she never had the experiences that she had before, which were constantly falling into cycles of binge eating and guilt and regret, because all of those feelings of guilt and regret and remorse and sorrow were so tightly bound to that very early infant stage, particularly for her, of within the first few weeks of being born. And that was illuminated for her. She was able to move on and build a completely different life for herself, connect with her body in a different way, and connect with her nourishment, i.e. food. She was able to see it as nourishment for her body, and was able to eat without regret, was able to nourish her body without guilt, without the heavy weight of guilt. And so my message is that womb alchemy is so relevant for not just individuals like who I've just described, for example, individual journeys and individual healing experiences, but also for the system, for the whole system to change. We need to change the fundamental ways in which human beings are being brought into the world. And that starts really from conception. So conception trauma is something else that I've written about on my blog. You can visit that at kimiyahealing.co.uk/blog. It's a very real thing, and I really believe that when trauma is addressed as deeply and holistically as possible, including as early as possible the early factors, which can be biographical or can be perinatal, but can also be pre-personal. And if you're interested in learning more about pre-personal work, you can read where we start to talk more about the soul frequency and the soul vibration, ancestral realms of healing. This ties very much into the latest findings in fields of epigenetics, etc., which show that trauma is actually carried through the nervous system for up to 7 generations or more in some cases. And this is really interesting because you can actually see how trauma is perpetuated through the physical body, because there has been stories, life experiences and conditions that have not been resolved, and they perpetuate. But the field of epigenetics also talks about the environment and how the environment can activate certain genes or can do the opposite, can actually lead to a transformational genetic structure. So I've talked a little bit about this in my blog post, which is called Spirit, the relationship between spirit and belief, and how that relates to consciousness and frequency of light. So it also talks about how energy healing works at a DNA level, and that's because of the embodied frequency of light, and how frequency of light affects fluids in the body, especially amniotic waters, and how that can actually that affects the DNA double helix, which is surrounded in H2O molecules. So if you're interested in how this all fits together, you can read my blog post. And more importantly, rather than it being a theoretical exercise and you're listening to this like, oh, okay, that's really interesting, it might be an opportunity for you, if you are finding this interesting or you're curious, to just drop into your own in utero experience, your own birth experience, your own awareness of conception, as many people are aware of their conception energetics. And I've got some guided meditations on here that can help you to do that. And when you do come up with a memory or an image, you can just write it down, and it might just be a couple of words at first. It might not be a clear picture, but over time, if you practice this, you will start to build up more of a conscious awareness of how you were feeling at the time and how the environment felt to you at the time. And this is beyond the mind. It's so beyond what you could think about. It's more coming from a felt sense, coming from it's like an energetic quality. It's a frequency that you're going to tune into, and along with that, it often does bring up memories or sensations in the body. So if you are doing this exercise to explore, also write down what kind of sensations are coming up in your body. It might be, for example, you feel things in your heart, maybe your gut. The gut is a very common place where I work with people, and they have imprints that are held in the gut at a cellular level even, that have affected them, but they go and are leading to things like digestive conditions, such as IBS. But these aren't conditions that have developed in adulthood. These are conditions that can be traced way back. So my work is to support the emergence of the root causes, and those root causes can be very early on in life. So if we go back to the original conversation I was having with my father, where it's about 2 young boys who have found themselves in positions of being murderers, of killing their fathers in murderous rage. You know, there needs to be more opportunity for young men and young boys, I believe, to really connect with their story, their bodies, their emotions in a place and a safe place. And often that is around and with other men. And if they're missing that figure, if they're missing that male energy in their life, for example, or their male energy in their life is a distorted one, it can be really hard for them to access something that feels safe enough to resonate with. And so they will always resonate with the first trauma imprint and the first model that they have, which is their father. And if that's a difficult relationship, then they're going to model that and they're going to reflect that. And we need to start supporting this healing work at a collective level, I believe, by creating systems and structures that go deeper than the ones we've got currently in society, that attempt to repair in some degree, or I wouldn't even say it's repair, maybe it's more like it's not even reparation, it's more like it's kind of like when you just get on with something and you just make the best out of what you've got, and try to rehabilitate. And it's that kind of, there's not really so much that we can do right now for you, you're far down the line, but maybe we can work on some rehabilitation. Now it's really hard to rehabilitate if you don't know what the root causes are, because you can only do so much in the surface levels, and it leads to frustration, it leads to disappointment, it can create a lot of skepticism and feeling of being stuck. And then if you imagine these young men are being incarcerated, they don't only have a feeling of often being stuck or being let down by the system, but they're actually in a cell, so they're physically they are stuck. So this stuckness that is prevalent, and that is characteristic of the system that we use to deal with extreme ends of society and people who have had extreme crisis and who are in those kinds of positions. Are we really working for freedom with the systems we've got, or are we creating more stuckness and containment where they actually need space and expansion, and without it becoming a philosophical conversation? I believe there's so many therapists around the world that are doing such incredible work at this very early age of perinatal psychology, perinatal trauma, and womb work, and it's super, super amazing. So if you're in this field, it would be amazing to hear from you if this podcast resonates, and it'd be lovely to hear about what you work with and how you're supporting your people and your collective. And I do hope that the systems that support mental health will really start to deeply recognise trauma and early life trauma that starts in utero and before that even. And so I hope I'm doing my best at the moment to support women to re-embody, reconnect with the womb. That will allow them to have a deeper connection with their actual sacred womb space. That supports more discernment when it comes to who's entering their womb and what is actually being offered into the womb space and the womb temple. And that's also how people can create more discernment in their partnerships and in their intimacy that they have, by being really, really aware that they are creating something really sacred in the womb space, and potentially a child, and the energetics of that child, what that child is going to be carrying, is going to reflect both parties. And so I hope that this podcast sheds some light on how womb alchemy is contributing to the nature of mental health and extreme mental health, by going further back to the root causes, by supporting a new paradigm of consciousness where women can take full responsibility, are empowered to be embodied, connected to their bodies and wombs, connected to the partners that they're conceiving with, intentional conception. They know what they're really aware, and they know and feel what they're creating, rather than it being accidental or being filled with regret or remorse or pain or fear, etc. And actually bring forth children into the world through birth processes that are harmonic and supportive of the natural spiraling of the baby through the birth canal, and of the woman's womb and yoni, and her actual physical structure and her energetics about the spiral of birth, and supporting that to be a normalized a normalized level of awareness is definitely part of my work. So I really believe that starts, like, this can be quite an elusive thing if you're listening to this and you've never really considered womb before, you've never considered what birth actually is at an energetic and a spiritual level, for your child and for the soul of that child. So if birth is just mechanical, for example, this might sound completely bizarre, but that's where the work of awareness begins. And often people seek spiritual and soul level answers when they have had to go through a lot of crisis, perhaps deep introspection, and when material and cognitive paradigms haven't sufficed, haven't got them to that crux of why, haven't given them the purpose, the reason behind the pain. And so I hope that we won't have to leave things too late. I hope that this maybe sparks curiosity in those who are in an early journey of womb embodiment, and it doesn't have to be, you might not be thinking about becoming a parent or having a conscious relationship even, but just doing it for yourself, to be embodied in your own womb and to be connected and feeling the power of your own womb as a center of creation. It can be hugely transformational for, I believe, the world, and I really do believe humanity's awakening. So if you'd like to visit my blog, please feel free, and if after that you've got any questions, you can reach out to me on my email address, safa@kimiyahealing.co.uk. As part of my work, I run a rebirthing program, which is a 10-day rebirth in the void of womb. So Womb Room so far has rebirthed 400 people, and both men and women come into Womb Room. And if you'd like to join, you can find the details on my website. I would welcome you to experience this very powerful container, this very powerful healing space, which is a shift at a consciousness level, so an identity level shift, which is often what's needed to get out of that stuckness. And I've had people that have written to me after Womb Room to say, I can't believe how my life has changed. It's like I'm a different person, and I feel like every day I'm being gifted something new, like a new gift, a new aha moment, a new harmony, and something that I've always sought is now becoming normalized. And that's because they've found themselves at a deeper level. And when you keep going deeper and finding yourself at a deeper level, everything that you're really seeking will seek you. And so it feels like you're experiencing a miracle every day. It feels like you're just in receipt of gifts every day. And it's really because you're getting deeper in alignment with your soul frequency and with who you are and who you exist to be and what you inherently exist to bring into this world, what your gift is, what your message is. And I believe every single person has a unique message, a unique gift that they're bringing into the world. And it's just about how deeply do people go within themselves to find that gift. And that does require a lot of rebirthing work. It requires a lot of being willing to let go of identities and ideals and ideas that are comfortable, maybe some that are uncomfortable, and begin again. And that's the work of Womb Room, and it really is a beginning again. So if you feel ready to begin again and you want to experience this 10-day journey, please check out my website, and if you have any questions, you can just let me know. I will see you on the next episode, and I hope that you're all really keeping well. Thank you for all of you who reached out to me on this podcast and said you really enjoy listening to them, and you're learning lots, and you're connecting with what I'm saying, what I'm sharing. And most of all, it feels really good that you're able to connect with something that I connect with, in that way. I get messages from people all around the world who I've never met saying, I really, really connect with your podcast. And I feel immediately connected to them because it's like, oh, it's my podcast, it's my voice, it's my expression. So, and then when we do talk, because we usually always talk when it's once they've reached out, it's amazing because it's like an immediate resonance. There's an immediate understanding. And yeah, I'm really pleased for that because because it's a great way for people who are like-minded and curious and willing to go deeper to get support, I feel, and to just have someone there who really believes that they can do it because they've been through that journey themselves. So I'm definitely one of those people who I really often recognise where people are and what they're trying to get out of, and also what they're trying to call in. So it's that trauma is a double-edged sword. It's not just pain, it's also the message. So I really hold that for everybody that I speak to and that comes to me, that there is something that you're bringing forth into the world. It just requires you to go deep enough to find it, and then deeper enough to express it. So yeah, thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you all really soon.